Hi and good afternoon and welcome to our last webinar in our Think Tree Winter series. If I could only press the right button, it might help. It would help so much actually. But there we go. And this afternoon I've got great pleasure in welcoming Tim Box. Tim is really an expert on anxiety, partly because he used to suffer from anxiety. I've also known him fairly well because I've gone through his training and can thoroughly recommend it. We're going to start with a little word about Think Tree. Just in case you don't know us yet, we are an international professional association for everybody in the whole span of well-being, from medics to any kind of therapist involved in health and wellness. We like to think that we offer people a lot more than other people in terms of the incentives that we offer, and plus the fact that we're very much focused on cutting edge approaches to health and well-being, and I think that's been really evidenced by some of the webinars we've run this week, and also by the fact that we support trainers and really help them to get their training out into the world. So a little bit about Tim. Tim always tells the tale that he escaped from the family plumbing business, and you know, he's probably saved an awful lot of people from his plumbing.
Indeed, yeah.
He's a remedial hypnotist and mind management expert who's run flourishing full-time practice for the last 7 years, and he's been an associate of one of the top practices in Harley Street for 3 years. He originally trained in hypnosis by world-renowned trainer Jonathan Chase with the Hypno Arts Academy, and he went on in 2014 to become one of only a handful of people in the world to be awarded a fellowship of the Academy and becoming one of their senior trainers. Tim created the control system based on his experience with clients and learnings of what he says thousands of one-to-one sessions in about 2015, and now teaches his methods throughout the world. There are over 50 control practitioners in the UK, Europe and United States, and new books are constantly being created, aren't they, Tim?
They are, yes.
They are. Tim is also a mentor for other hypnotherapists and regularly gives talks and demonstrations about the power of the mind. And today, with anxiety being described as a modern epidemic, Tim really questions our approach to it, says it's okay to have that approach, but today we're going to look at Tim's approach based on very much personal experience and thousands of sessions. Okay, if you're watching live, you'll see somewhere on your menu bar a Q&A button. Depends whether you're on an iPad or a laptop. And if you've got a main question that you'd like to ask at the end, if you can just type that question in there, that would be really helpful. If there's something which you go urgently, I really want to know this, then if you can just stick it in the chat box. Again, you should see that on your menu bar. Do make sure your device is charged and plugged in. Headset might help. And also, when I remember, because sometimes I forget till near the end of Q&A, we have got a poll for you to fill in, so give us some feedback about the webinar. I'd be really appreciative if you could do that. To get the best out, as usual, we always say have a pad and paper to hand. You might want to take some notes. Glass of water, always great, and an open mind. So with that, I am going to hand over to Tim, and Tim, off you go.
Thank you very much. Okay, hello everyone. What I'm going to talk to you about today, as Rosemary said, this is very much, I'll talk about my approach, my experience, because you know, my experience is the only one I can talk about with any, you know, great deal of authority. But I do see a lot of clients to treat anxiety. Is the thing that I see most. I work one-to-one. I suppose you would arguably call me a hypnotherapist, although I don't necessarily use the methods that you might expect your common or garden hypnotherapist to be using, because I don't really work with any hypnotic trance or anything. I'm very much dealing with one-to-one with our belief systems at core level, at subconscious level. The reason I talk about, or people talk about me as being an anxiety expert, if you like, is, yeah, because I've been through it. I used to suffer very, very bad social anxiety. And I recognize what helped my journey in terms of coming out the other side of that. But also because anxiety is, and we use the phrase already, modern epidemic, the thing that most people are dealing with. People generally know somebody who suffers debilitating anxiety, or even if they don't realize they do without knowing it, because people are not talking about it but suffering with it. And as a result, in my practice, I've run a full-time practice now for just short of 10 years actually now. I think since that bio, it's been a few years since I did that bio. And yeah, nearly 50%, maybe even more than that, of the people that I see are dealing with anxiety. So inevitably, whether you like it or not, you end up becoming fairly well educated and, you know, somewhat of an expert in this field, just because you listen to a lot of people. You know, you could argue that for the last few years I've been doing a study in anxiety and anxiety sufferers, which is why inevitably I don't just have my opinion on it, but a lot of other people's opinions on it. And I think there is probably a reason why I look at it slightly differently, which maybe will become evident as I talk about stuff as we go along. But yeah, as Rosemary said, pop any questions in that you need me to answer. If I say something and you're like, oh, hang on, what was that? Explain that. Just bung it in there and I'll try and backtrack on it. But if you have any general questions, chuck them in at the end, because I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have. And this is the thing, I'm not going to say, oh, tell you what, people, I've got the answer. I've just got what I know based on my experiences of myself and working with other people. Now, the reason we called this talk kind of everything you've been told about anxiety, you know, it might be wrong, is because it seems like the message that I put out there potentially meets with not resistance, but the recognition that it's different than what we've been told already. And I'll explain what I mean by this, because when I was approached by a publisher a couple of years ago to create a book, and they said, we're interested in what you do. What topic would you like to write the book on? And I said, well, I'd like to write it on anxiety. And they just rejected it. They said, no, there's too many books on anxiety. It will just be lost in the fog. It won't be, you know, it won't be anything new for people. And then I explained my take on it, and then they changed their stance on it. They said, right, yes, let's put that out, because that's different than what we've been told and what we hear talked about. So that's the first inkling I had, that maybe what I'm talking about is slightly different than what's out there, maybe different than how your general mental health system sees it, maybe. Then, of course, last year I did a TEDx talk, and the talk's entitled How to Stop Feeling Anxious About Anxiety. And you can find it on YouTube on the TEDx channel. And I'd applied for a TEDx talk for a good few years in a row. I think it was the third year I'd applied. And it's not easy to get a TEDx talk, not just because lots of people want to do them, and most of the time you have to be invited to do them, but you can't talk about certain things. So there's certain topics that TED will not let you talk about. You won't even get on the event, let alone get put on their YouTube channel out to millions of people. One of them is religion, one of them is politics, and the other one is any form of what they might regard as pseudoscience. Now, what that means is anything that doesn't have proper scientific evidential grounding. Now, I know that hypnosis and hypnotherapy has loads of evidential proof about its efficacy and everything like that. So I know I'm on solid ground, but not with TED. Hypnotherapy is one of those things that they regard as pseudoscience. Another thing, by the way, that TED regard as pseudoscience is neuroscience. You're not allowed to talk neuroscience unless you are a neuroscientist, funny enough. And if you look at their guide notes, they say it's not that we're saying neuroscience isn't science, it's just that we're saying a lot of people are doing pseudoscientific approaches with neuroscience as their backup evidence, when maybe the correlation isn't as sound as they think it is, that kind of thing. So I'm trying to apply for this TED talk about what I do, recognizing that what I do isn't recognized as a thing by TED. And it took me a while to get in there, because what I was pitching was always just outside the boundaries of what they would allow. And then it came back last year's event, and I was like, right, I want to talk about anxiety. And I focused it mainly on my experience I didn't go anywhere like, here's some evidence for this, here's some evidence for that, because I knew that potentially that could be shot down or simply just disqualified. So I just talked about my experience with myself and conversations with other anxiety sufferers. And I thought I was on pretty solid ground there, and got accepted for the event, did the event, got great feedback from it afterwards, really enjoyed it. If you ever get a chance to do a TED Talk, do it. It's an amazing experience. It'll be the most challenging thing you've ever done, probably, but it'll be amazing. And then, of course, everything's videoed, and they send it off to head office TED to put it up on their website. And it came back very quickly. Mine was flagged up as potentially content outside of what TED would allow. So I had to wait for this review. So it nearly got banned by TED, effectively. And if you look at the talk, if you look at it online, you'll see there's this disclaimer from TED at the start of it. It did go up, but they put a disclaimer on it. And it was about, this represents the views of this individual, doesn't necessarily fall in line with current thinking or what we think or all that sort of thing. So, yeah, I know what I'm talking about. Whilst it might resonate with you, it is different from what is viewed out there. And in fact, yesterday I gave a talk to a corporate gig. It was at the local council offices, and they emailed me beforehand and said, look, we know the message you say, can you avoid this side of things that you're talking about? Because I'd given a talk there before, and even though everyone had loved it, they recognised that some of the things I said were different from their current mental health wellness policy. So it contradicted what they were telling their people. They thought directly. I think it's a little more nuanced than just contradicting, but that was what they said. So this is why I'm probably aware that the way I think about it is slightly different. And the main area that I differ from standard policy is that when you go in the workplace now, mental well-being, they say, talk about what's going on, go to see the doctor if you feel anything's going on with you emotionally. Anxiety, if you feel suffering anxiety, go to see the doctor. And I talk to people a lot about how the doctor might not be the best option, okay? They might not be the thing that's going to help us with anxiety. And there's a few reasons for that. And I feel a great deal of sympathy for doctors here, because they're asked to treat emotional difficulties when they're not necessarily trained specifically in dealing with people's emotional difficulties. They're medically trained. I don't necessarily see anxiety as a medical problem. I see it as an emotional issue, okay? So doctors are restricted in a few different ways. Firstly, time. A doctor gets between 8 and 10 minutes with you to find out what's going on. To diagnose, prescribe, that sort of thing. And that's not a tremendous amount of time when dealing with an emotional issue. Everyone that I've seen for their anxiety, even though, we could say, oh, it's always going to be this, it's that sort of thing, everyone's got their own individual story. To understand someone's anxiety response, you're going to need to spend a little bit more time than 8 to 10 minutes with them. And also, everything that we do in terms of therapeutically is based on the client-practitioner relationship. So we generate rapport. We connect with the person so that they feel comfortable to tell us what they need to tell us. And also, that bit of their mind that's got the issue brings it forward to be shared. If their mind isn't connecting with us, they won't even be aware of what the issue is, because that part of them isn't coming forward with it. And you can't do that in 8 to 10 minutes. And in fact, when I run trainings, the thing I'm looking for, to accept someone on a training, is the ability to build a basic level of rapport. And if I don't think you can do that, I'm not going to train you, because I can't teach you to do that. That's something, in my opinion, that's something that we do innately. There's one or two people I've turned down on the training. One of them was a doctor who wanted to train in what I do, but when I saw them working in the workshop we were doing, they couldn't generate that basic level of rapport, probably because they trained themselves not to, because they can't afford to. So a doctor probably isn't going to have the correct approach due to time constraints and how used to they are of just not building rapport with people, just seeing them as a set of symptoms, okay? Secondly, they're restricted knowledge-wise. They're not mental health experts. No doctor would claim to be, and it would be unfair of us to expect them to be. And yet we're asking them to understand quite a nuanced area of study, quite a nuanced area of assistance, if you like, of wellness. But they're not trained in that. So, if a doctor wants to become a mental health professional, they have to train for about 6 more years to become a psychiatrist. Yeah, there's a lot of study goes into doing that. And yet we ask them to diagnose something anxiety-wise, you know. Thirdly, third area, they're restricted resources. You go to your local GP, certainly in the UK, and they have very limited things they can offer you. You know, we sometimes complain about doctors dishing out tablets, you know, pills left, right and centre. But when someone comes in there suffering with crippling anxiety, desperate for help, and the only option they've got is pills or a 16-week waiting list for some CBT, what are you going to do? You're going to send them away feeling hopeless and like they've now got months to wait for any assistance, or are you going to just give them something in their hand they can take away? And don't get me wrong, I know there are people who are alive today who wouldn't be alive unless they'd received that prescription from the doctor. I get that it can help massively, but even when tablets assist us, they don't cure the issue. They don't fix the problem. We've still got to deal with why our anxiety response is so high, and it's not about tablets. You know, a medical solution to a non-medical problem won't solve the problem, but it can help us through it. It can help us deal with it. So my message is not don't go to the doctor. My message is recognize the limitations that your doctor has and realize that if they say to you, you have an anxiety disorder, you don't have to take that as gospel. They say to you, you're locked in. This is the way you're going to be from now on. You don't have to believe that just because it's the doctor saying it. You know, when a doctor says I've got, you know, a doctor told me once I had coarctation of their aorta and I needed to have a stent put in so that I wouldn't die young. You know, I believed him because he was an expert in that field. Yeah. So I believed him wholesale. I didn't even need to see the scans, although he showed me them, because he was telling me and he's the expert. When it comes to anxiety, you don't have to take the doctor's opinion as gospel. Take whatever assistance they can give you. And it's great to be able to just go and see someone. We have that in this country at the moment. Hopefully it carries on. And it's brilliant, you know. But my message is not don't go and see the doctor. It's understand the limitations your doctor will have. I still believe we have to do the work to change our emotional responses. And if we don't expect to have to do that, then we won't do it. We won't actually take the steps we need to change this stuff. And the funny thing is, all the people I speak to, or certainly the vast majority of people I've spoken to about anxiety, the people that come through my door of my clinic and say, help me with this, they say they've already been to the doctor. And they say, I knew it wouldn't be of that much help. They recognize that the doctor isn't a brilliant option when it comes to dealing with anxiety. And you might say, well, okay, then why do we go there? And I think the answer is we go there because we are told these days anxiety is an illness. And I think that might be why when we feel too anxious, we go to the doctor, because we think anxiety is an illness. And in my experience, the truth is a little bit different. There tend to be two popular opinions. You know, if you talk to the average person on the street, two popular opinions about anxiety. One is you just need to get over it, pull yourself together. It's not real. Yeah. The other is this is a mental illness and there's nothing you can do about it. Either you have it or you don't. And neither of these positions are tremendously helpful for their own individual reasons. And both of them, in my experience, are wrong. The truth is somewhere in the middle. Yet we don't ask to feel this way. So of course it's real. You know, we don't ask to feel massively anxious, and yet it seems to just happen to us. Of course it's real, but doesn't mean we can't change it. Just because we didn't ask for it and we have it doesn't mean we can't change it. And that's been my personal experience and my experience with all the clients that I've seen with this. But the first thing about changing it is understanding that we are not locked into a condition or a disorder or an illness. We just have learned a certain response at the moment that doesn't feel right now. And that's okay, because you know what, we learn all the time. And all we've got to do is learn the better response. But to do this, we might need to understand a little bit what our mind's trying to achieve with our responses. There was a very good talk that I saw at the UK Hypnosis Convention recently. And it kind of, the guy who was talking, James Brown, he laid out very simply what the kind of message we're trying to convey. And that is that anxiety and our emotional responses feel like something that happens to us. Just it happens, when actually it's something that we do. And the reason it doesn't feel like something that we do is because it's happening outside of our conscious direction. It's happening in our subconscious. So it feels like it's just arrived on us, like it's come from the universe or from outside us, but actually it's come from within us. And understanding why a part of us might trigger this reaction that seems so horrible goes a long way towards sorting it out. Okay, so I would argue that anxiety is not an illness. Anxiety is an emotion. That's it. Bottom line, anxiety is an emotion. No worse or better than any of the other emotions that we feel. Every emotion is valuable. Every emotion has a purpose. Okay. Now, I have a little way of trying to get people to understand their emotional responses. And if you've seen anything that I do, you'll know exactly what it is. It's a little analogy that I have. I think of the mind like a ship. Apologies for those that know me, have listened to me before, because if you get me talking about this stuff for too long, I'm going to start talking about this flipping ship thing. Yeah. But I'll go through it with you because I think it's a valuable analogy and it helps us understand it. Okay. If we think of the mind like a ship, every ship has a captain and a crew on board. In this analogy, the captain is that logical, conscious part of our thinking, the bit that knows where we're going, why we're going there, even has a fair idea of how we're going to get there and the best way to do it. But unfortunately, the part of our mind that has its hands on all the things that steer and sail our ship, that's the crew. And the crew is your subconscious. Okay? All of your crew members are doing certain things towards sailing the ship in what they feel is the right direction. And you might think, well, if the crew were just listening to the captain as they ideally would on a fully functioning ship, then life should be plain sailing. We'd say, right, I want to go in that direction. Your crew would say, aye, aye, captain, and just do everything required to get you where you want to go. But unfortunately, our crew aren't always listening to our captain. And there's a really good reason for this, because when your crew were first on board this ship, starting to assign themselves their jobs, there wasn't a captain on board. The first few years of our life, maybe up to the age of about 8 or 9, we were mostly subconscious in the way we were processing things. We were very much emotional and in the moment. Our crew were very much running around trying to just learn how to keep the ship afloat. And what happens then is that you get certain crew members doing certain things that might keep the ship afloat, but aren't necessary as we become an adult. And maybe now become like a burden to us, become counterproductive. And so we get stuck with all these beliefs and responses that don't help us anymore. And our anxiety response and how high that anxiety response kicks in might be one of those things that we've got a member of our crew, a part of our mind doing to a degree that doesn't feel appropriate for the given situation. Okay. I think, if we think about anxiety, the extremes of anxiety being a fight or flight response, it's a little bit like an evolutionary hangover. Yeah, we don't really need high anxiety these days. We don't need to be fighting for our lives every day that we get out of bed. We don't have to kill people to eat. We have a slightly less urgent existence these days. But of course, the ability to go into fight or flight, to take damage and still continue fighting or running away, is that thing that we have that's enabled us to survive as a species. So we're kind of fighting against that natural tendency to, in the face of the most important stuff, go into the most important anxiety response, the survival response. Okay, and this is the thing I want to kind of get across to you guys that are listening to this webinar in terms of how I think about anxiety. Your crew steer your ship using emotions. So if we perceive something to be dangerous, a member of our crew might trigger fear. We would feel that certain type of discomfort that we regard as fear. And we'd recognize that we only get to feel comfortable again if we move away from the danger. So our crew has steered our ship where they felt it needed to go to keep safe. If we think somebody has wronged us, our crew might trigger anger. We might feel that sort of adrenaline kicking in and we'd be inspired to take action to right the wrong. Again, just the crew saying that needs to happen now. So let's make it happen. So in this sort of way of thinking, what do we regard anxiety as? And I get that everyone watching this will have their own idea about what anxiety is for them, because we all have a slightly different relationship with it. And that's something I've learned over these years as well, talking to loads of different people. But at its simplest form, in this particular analogy, anxiety is your crew saying, this is important. I need the captain's attention on this. Now, it might be something bad's going to happen or something good's happen if we remember to do this thing, but it's the thing of importance that your crew won't allow your captain to lose focus on, which is why it's kind of a real insistent, constant state. Yeah. Now, the thing is, when I explain this analogy to people, they often say to me, oh, if there's a member of my crew doing anxiety, can we throw that guy overboard? Can we get rid of him? And the answer to that is no, unfortunately, or fortunately, actually. We have the same crew on board all of our lives. They might do different jobs, they might do different things at different times, but it's the same crew. So we've always got to work with that crew. And if a member of your crew is doing the wrong thing, funny enough, it isn't actually trying to make your life a misery. But of course, I hear this all the time, that anxiety is the enemy. Anxiety is the part of me that seems to want me to be unhappy. Okay. But of course, your crew are actually working on a slightly different principle to that. They're actually trying to find the best strategy for the most happiness. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, yeah, but I know I've been told survival is what your subconscious does. All of your subconscious just geared towards survival, keeping you alive. Not interested in making you happy, just wants to keep you alive. I've seen videos of Tony Robbins saying that. But that's okay. Everyone's allowed to be wrong, even Tony Robbins, okay? For me, happiness is the ultimate goal. Safety is important, don't get me wrong, because safety is a key component element of happiness. You can't feel happy if you don't feel safe. End of. But we know happiness is the goal rather than just staying alive, because if it was just survival, you wouldn't see people jumping out of aeroplanes just for the lols. Yeah, you wouldn't see people, because it's safer to not jump out of the aeroplane. You wouldn't see people jumping off of bridges with elastic bands tied to their ankles. Bungee jumping wouldn't be a thing if all your mind was doing was keeping you safe. Because it's safer to not jump off of the bridge. Might be less thrilling, less exciting, and maybe for some less joyful, but it's safer not to. And perhaps the biggest indicator of why I feel happiness is the goal of your crew rather than just survival. If survival was what your crew was geared towards, you wouldn't see anyone ever ending their own life. Suicide would be impossible if survival was all that our subconscious was geared towards. But what are those times when unfortunately some people take that option? When they don't regard any possibility of any future happiness, and where they are is pain. Yeah. And that's the thing about depression, I suppose. It isn't sort of sadness, it's the numbness that comes from there's nowhere to sail the ship to. So your crew, stop triggering emotions, stop doing anything. What's the point? There's nowhere better than this, and here is pretty rubbish. Yeah. So if we work on the principle that our crew are only trying to find us the route to happiness, it kind of makes things a lot easier, because then we can dismiss that idea that there's part of us actually trying to destroy us, actually trying to make our life a misery. Even when we hear that voice telling us things about ourselves we don't like you'll never be loved, you're rubbish at everything, you're no good, you're not good enough. Yeah. That part isn't trying to bring us down. It's just trying to stop us from launching into something that we can't handle because we're not good enough. It's steering us away from negative experiences. So, in my opinion, even the horrible stuff is all about keeping you on the road to some form of happiness. And yes, safety may be a big part of that happiness. So I guess what I want to talk about is what clients want from me as well. Because I hear people all the time saying they want to be free of anxiety. But if we work on this principle that anxiety is a valuable emotion, it steers us towards the important stuff, then it would be really weird to be free of that, wouldn't it? I mean, there are, I say in my TED talk, there are people that don't feel anxiety, but they're dead people, yeah, or psychopaths, people that literally don't have the ability to have any concern for the consequences of theirs or anyone else's actions, yeah. Human beings, we're meant to feel anxious every day. You know, I say this a lot. Friday mornings, I wake up feeling anxious. I've got to take the bins out. Yeah, it's not crippling anxiety. It's just a little nudge to my head. Oh yeah, take the bins out. It's my crew saying that's important right now. So I do it, and no more anxiety. Yeah, it's anxiety is the little nudges in the right directions. But of course, when it gets extreme, it's not so helpful. Okay, but the reason it gets extreme is because we're told anxiety is an illness. I see people, I get calls from mums and dads talking about their kids. They're so anxious, they're going through lots of anxiety right now. And it's exam time. And I'm like, why are you ringing the therapist when your child is having a perfectly healthy response to a pressure situation? They're really, really anxious about their exams. What, and you're going to tell them they're ill because they feel anxious? And this happens too much when we start to regard feeling anxious as an indicator of illness rather than somebody trying to tell us something in there. And that's why the anxiety goes from, you know, low levels of, oh, I must remember to do that, to, wow, now I'm massively anxious. When I speak to people and ask, what are you anxious about? There's two common answers. I don't know what I'm anxious about, or I'm anxious about the fact that my anxiety could kick in at any moment. I'm anxious about anxiety. Because after all, if feeling anxious is simply an indicator of how ill I am, then I'd always be scanning for it, wouldn't I? I'd be checking to see how anxious. I'd wake up in the morning and I'd be like, how anxious do I feel today? Oh, I do feel a bit anxious. Because, you know, you look for anxiety. That's an anxious thing to do. So you create anxiety. I was there. This is what I used to do, especially if I had something challenging coming up that day. You know, I did that thing of mistakenly thinking my anxiety landed on me at random. And wouldn't you know it, it seems to land on me on the days when I've got something important to do, or I've got to go and see someone, or I've got to go into a new situation. Wouldn't it just be typical my anxiety flared up on this day? But of course it does, because that's the bit of you saying, this is a challenge. Wake up, be attentive, do it as best you can, or, you know, avoid it. That's sometimes what anxiety is telling us, isn't it? But so it's like, I used to run anxiety workshops purely for anxious people. And I learned not to do that very quickly because people don't show up because they're too anxious to show up. And I'm thinking, of course I was. Why I wouldn't have showed up as well. But I'll get a text from people saying, wouldn't you know, I can't make it today. Wouldn't you know my anxiety's flared up today? But of course it has, because you're going somewhere to talk about your anxiety with strangers. Of course you're going to feel anxious about that. I was always so proud of the people that walked in, even though they were terrified, because it's the most challenging thing I could ask them to do, is come and talk about their anxiety with other people, even people that understand anxiety. It's a massive challenge. I suffered debilitating social anxiety. I couldn't go into a room with people that I didn't know, or I thought that were going to pay me some sort of attention that I couldn't handle. Yeah. And so I know what it felt like. But I didn't get rid of that by going to see the doctor. And this is the thing, you don't get rid of anxiety at all, do you? You just get comfortable with the fact this is a normal, healthy response. And what happens then, of course, is you don't feel so anxious, because for whatever you feel anxious about and whatever challenges you're facing, you don't pile on top of that your concern about the fact you feel anxious. How ill am I today? And this is, I think, where the message slightly differs. I think we talk about raising awareness of mental health issues, anxiety in particular. And that's all the message is. People suffer. There's loads of people suffering mental health issues. You're not alone. But we're not saying, my message would be, everyone feels anxious because we're human. If you didn't feel anxious, that would be weird. That would be a disorder. You'd be one emotion short of the full set. That would be strange. But anxiety is just an emotion. And I'll tell you this, let me tell you my perceived and often common story of anxiety that I see with people. They'll have something. If you imagine your crew are all trying to get certain things into the captain's attention at various times, yeah, going back to the captain and crew analogy, yeah, and they'll say something. They'll say, pay attention to this. Okay, I want to pay attention to this. And there's sort of, oftentimes you get lots of crew members vying for attention. You know, when we feel that overwhelm of, I don't know what to do, because as soon as I try and do this thing, a bit of me says, oh, don't forget that though, or don't lose sight of that. And it's just crew members vying for your attention. And sometimes there gets to be this thing that seems a little bit more important than the stuff you've had previously, or something about this thing that this crew member's saying isn't allowing you to go and do anything for other crew members. It's just, no, you've got to do this, you've got to pay attention to this. And sometimes there are things you can't do anything about, things like what other people think of you, or a situation that you're waiting for results on, like medical tests or exam results, you know, and you're really anxious about it, but of course you can't actually action anything about it. So you've just got this crew member shouting about it all the time. Then what are the other crew members going to do to get their everyday stuff done? They've got to shout even louder. Before you know it, you're on board your ship with everyone shouting in your mind because they need to get heard about the thing that needs to happen at this time. And then if that stays for long enough, your crew just get used to shouting. And before you know it, you've kind of dialed up your anxiety response. And even the slightest little thing, then you've got someone in here screaming at you about it. And yet this is kind of the world we live in, though. I think because of social media, because of the internet, because, you know, we're constantly connected to everyone, we can potentially be constantly trying to do dozens and dozens of things at once. And regardless of what you might think you can or are good at doing, we don't multitask. We do one thing at a time. So if we're trying to do lots of things at a time, we're trying to juggle. And maybe we're not great at juggling. You know, as human beings, we're not necessarily set up to do multiple things at once. So what I think we've got to do is allow your crew to stop shouting. Of course, then, when they've been shouting for a while, the crew member that's shouting loudest is the crew member that's saying, why is everyone shouting? Something's gone wrong on our ship. And that's the point where you get diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, because that's the thing you're most anxious about now, is your anxiety. Now, I think I should at some point explain how I kind of got the other side of my severe anxiety. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm happy to feel anxious every single day. So I was a bit anxious about doing this. I wanted to prep it right. I wanted to make sure I said the right things, said everything that I wanted to get across. So that's normal everyday anxiety. Probably waking up a little bit more attentive about that than I would if I was just doing some paperwork today. You know, that's fine. But I don't suffer with anxiety anymore. I don't have this part of me saying there's something wrong with my anxiety response. And I think I was fortunate enough to suffer social anxiety around the time that people didn't really talk about social anxiety. I just felt anxious and I just assumed, well, that's how I am. I don't know whether everyone else is the same. I assume they're varying degrees of similar, but this is just me. And as a result, I didn't get diagnosed with anything. So I didn't get locked in that particular diagnosis. And I was free then to evolve past it by doing the steps I needed to do. The problem we have at the moment is people get labelled with their anxiety disorder and then their crew aren't even trying to operate outside the boundaries of what that disorder or that illness means to them. Yeah, we don't do things we regard as impossible. If I was linked, you know, I don't practice levitation very often. I don't think I'm going to levitate. It's outside the realms of what I think is possible. So my crew aren't trying to get me to practice levitation at all. And it's almost like getting over anxiety can seem that weird, that unlikely, especially when we've been given the diagnosis of having an anxiety disorder. So I think I was fortunate enough to be freed of any of those constraints, and then I could do the thing that I needed to do to change this. And I think there was a few things that I did personally to get over it, and things that I advise other people to do. Okay, yeah, I work with people directly. I communicate directly with their subconscious processes so that we can, you know, guide that part of them to a different response. And it's a very fast and effective method. But what are you going to do? You know, what can I give people that are watching this wanting to change their anxiety response? What's a takeaway that you can just do for yourself? Okay, the things that I did, first of all, never thought I was ill, or certainly would refuse to believe I was ill. Because every time I felt anxious, it was for a reason. I understood I was anxious about this thing or this thing. Even when my anxiety was about how anxious I might feel today, I knew that was a reason. And in my mind, it was a good reason to feel anxious. So I didn't regard my response as unhealthy, just unhelpful. And as a result, I was then free to do the next two steps, which the first thing was to listen to my crew. I think when we feel emotions we're not comfortable with, we put a lot of energy into pushing them away. to saying, no, I'm trying not to feel that way. And it's almost like that crew member comes up to the captain and you're saying, no, I don't want to hear this. I don't want to hear this. But of course, the crew member's there because it regards this as massively important. So if we push it away, it might just start to speak louder. It might even start to shout. And that's when it becomes a problem. So I've decided to listen to what do I feel I'm anxious about? Because funny enough, when you listen to what your crew are saying and you apply that adult, logical, conscious part of your thinking, you just might get your crew to listen to you. Because now they're not shouting their message at you because it's been heard. Now they may be free to take direction from the captain, the logical part of you. You know, if you work out, I'm feeling anxious about something I can do nothing about, you know, I'm literally, it's out of my control, then the best strategy for the most happiness is to stop thinking about it. No amount of thinking about it will change anything about it. And it's really easy for me to sit here and say this stuff because I'm sure it feels like you've tried this before if you're sitting there and you're dealing with anxiety. But I think a lot of the time this goes hand in hand with trying to push those feelings away. And I think if we try to understand them and try to listen to the crew, then we might be able to get a better response from the crew. And it's not just about knowing this feeling is inappropriate or it's higher than it should be. It's about being able to apply that knowledge to the part of you that can automatically respond to that knowledge. Yeah, there's this thing I always say that in the old days when we used to think the earth was flat, I mean, way back in the old days, not the people that still think the earth is flat, but way back in the old days, sailors, if they had to sail into uncharted waters, would have a fear of falling off the edge of the earth. Then when we realized the earth is round, they stopped having that fear because they now had the knowledge that made that fear massively inappropriate. And they understood it at the belief level, the subconscious level. When we've got that, it's impossible to feel fear about the thing we know isn't dangerous. And that's what I'm talking about, taking the understanding of the situation and what would be the best response for us and being able to apply it to the part of us that can give us that automatic reaction. Okay? And probably the third thing, and probably the most important thing, is I stopped beating myself up about the way I feel or not doing well enough in certain situations. I decided I would always be kind. Because when I started to view that part of my mind like different people in there, I could see the value of managing those relationships, not shouting at myself to try and do better. Because you know what, shouting at yourself doesn't make you do better. It actually makes you do worse. Even though we might have learned as children that when our parents really wanted us to do something, they'd shout at us. They're only shouting because you know what they want, but you haven't done it yet. And you're trying not to do it. So they think shouting, bit of fear, you'll do it. And then we learn, okay, that's how I motivate people. Maybe that's how I motivate myself. But of course, your mind is always trying to find the best strategy. You don't have to shout at it. You just need to guide it in the right direction. And it will go there. You won't be able to stop it once it sees the better direction. But you can only do that with kindness. You can only inspire better responses, motivating yourself, being positive. If you're negative to yourself, I always say you beat yourself up, you just end up beaten. Yeah, of all the people that, you talk to yourself worse than you talk to anyone else, probably. Certainly I was doing that. And it's only when you decide, like, make a deliberate decision, I'm not going to do that anymore. No matter what happens, no matter how many mistakes I make, I'm always going to make sure I talk to myself with positivity and kindness. And then you might just inspire a greater level of belief in yourself as well. I was asked the question recently, what would you, if you could change one thing about everyone, because obviously I see lots of different things, what's the kind of the all-encompassing thing that if you changed it, it would solve a multitude of issues, more issues than anything else. And the whole thing, so if I could Thanos it and click my fingers and something about the universe changed, I would switch off anyone's ability to give themselves grief, to beat themselves up and be negative to themselves. If we could switch that off, I'd probably not have a job, to be fair. There wouldn't be any issues. Because even though you might say, oh no, my low self-esteem comes from other people have said. Yeah, they planted the seed, but it's you that's been watering it for the rest of your life. It's you that's been repeating that to yourself as true all this time. And then when you don't do so well, you beat yourself up to try and do better. You chastise yourself, you have a go at yourself. And it just creates massive negativity aboard your ship. Yeah, and the crew don't feel able to sail anywhere. And so that's the kind of three things I did. refused to accept I was ill. So I didn't constrain myself in that. Listened to what my mind was telling me, the reasons why I was anxious, what was I anxious about actually, and then applied logic to it. And then always apply that with kindness. Yeah, your crew are not deliberately trying to sink your ship. They're trying to sail you towards a really good place. They just might think it's a different direction than you think it is, or they might think they're not allowed to sail in the direction you think we need to go for whatever reason, ever things they've learned. Yeah. So, so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. And I think I might be at the end of the presentation part of this webinar, and I'd be happy now to take any questions you might have.
Hi Tim, thank you so much. Do you know, I love your 3-step program. And funny enough, I mean, when I had Lyme disease, one of the things I did was decide I wasn't ill. Yeah. There's so many times we lock ourselves in. Yeah, and I get that, you know, we're probably given a diagnosis, but you know, the thing about it, when we go to a doctor for stuff, again, I feel like I'm being down on doctors. I'm really not. And please don't take away, oh, but Tim Box said don't go to the doctor when I'm feeling anxious or depressed. Look, please don't think that. I'm not here to give medical advice. And I guess saying don't go to the doctor would be medical advice, wouldn't it? So I'm not there for that. But I do think, I think there's to ask them to give us a diagnosis. When we have a medical problem, we explain the symptoms. The doctor says, that sounds a bit like this. Let's run some tests. And they find out. And then it either is and they treat it, or it isn't, it's something else and they treat that. With mental health issues, or emotional health issues, as I prefer to call it, there are no tests. They'll say, that sounds a bit like you're suffering with anxiety. So your options are, but there's no tests they then run to confirm it, because it's an emotional issue. It's going on in here. And as much as we might be able to scan the brain, we can't see the mind. That's going on inside us. That's a completely internal process. So that's why I think if they're going to give me a diagnosis, I should probably accept that I know me better than they do. You know, I've been with me for 47 years. They might have been with me for 8 to 10 minutes. So I'm going to guess that my understanding of me is better than their understanding of me. And maybe I'll decide what I need to do or what diagnosis I accept. Okay, which again, I feel like I've just ended on a really harsh note for doctors there. If you're a doctor and you're watching, apologies. I love doctors. They have saved my life on more than one occasion. So please don't deny me treatment. But funny thing was, I got chatting to 3 psychiatrists at the end of the debut screening of the TED Talk. There were some psychiatrists there. And I thought they were going to have a go at me because I'm very aware that the message might not be congruent. And they were like, this is what we keep trying to say. Is that it's not about the medication, but we have to give medication because that's how we're trained. And they're saying it doesn't seem to be the medication that does the job. You know, that just might help you feel better whilst you do the work you need to do to get this change. And yet they'll have people coming to them and it's frustrating as hell for them because they'll have people saying, just give me the meds, just give me the tablets. And they'll be saying, that's not the work. That's not how the work gets done. We can give you tablets to help you through this real crisis point, and hopefully it will give you some relief from the way you feel. But you've got to remember, that's a drug-induced good feeling. We want you to feel good normally without drugs. Yeah. So yeah. We've got a question from Claire. Hi, Claire. And Claire says, how do you help someone see the logic when they are anxious?
That's a really good question. Because I realize that when we go into that emotional state, we're very much subconsciously dominant, and it can be difficult. And people ask me all the time, how do I get people to get help? How do I help them? People only get help when they're ready to get help. And if that person understands that logic will actually have an impact, then it will go in. And this is the point here. Most of the time, when we're trying to talk logically to someone in a state of panic or a state of high anxiety, their major thought is, you don't think this is real. You're not understanding how I feel. And that's what their crew is telling them. And that's why they're rejecting what you're saying. If we understand that logic actually has an impact, trust me, your crew can be logical. They can apply all of this common sense almost, if you like, but they're not trying to at the moment, because it seems to me we get most anxiety sufferers invested in trying to get their feelings validated rather than to get them assisted and changed, because it's such a struggle. When I was going through anxiety, I very much felt like if I mention this, my dad's going to say, well, you know, you just need to buck up, sort it out, mate, but it would be a mistake to think that everyone trying to be logical about this illogical reaction you have is simply saying, we don't believe you. Yeah, they're not saying that, but I think that's why we reject the logic. I get when we're in a state of panic, we might not be thinking logically. For me, the work gets done before we feel all this stuff, if you know what I mean. When we do work one-to-one, when we're in a state of calm and we're there to do something. Don't get me wrong, sometimes you have to bring forward the negative feeling to kind of feel it go away. I get that. But I think your crew are well able, your subconscious is well able, just because it does emotion doesn't mean it doesn't do logic. It does understanding. And there is going to be the right time to deliver that little insight, that little nugget of truth that enables your crew to say, oh, thank God, I don't have to do that anymore. And I don't have to feel bad about that anymore. And I don't have to be concerned with this anymore. Because as soon as those bits of truth go in there, that is the answer. That is the solution.
I think, it's very true that often having a reason for something, you say, well, this is actually why it's happening, can lead to huge breakthroughs for people. Do you think, Tim, that people are more anxious than they used to be?
I think, yeah, potentially. I sort of touched on that when I was talking about social media and internet and stuff. I think so. For example, when I was younger, I went through a phase where I experienced some bullying, and the thing that I could do at 3:20, the bell rings, and I go home, and I'm suddenly away from the war zone. Yeah, and I'm with my loving family, and I'm safe, and I'm calm, and I'm happy, and I can steel myself and re-energize to go into battle tomorrow again. So I have a break from it, and in fact I have long breaks from it. But these days, our bullies, they're in our pocket, aren't they? Because we're constantly connected to everyone. And I think as a result, we inevitably live a slightly more anxious existence. I say slightly more, you could argue massively more anxious existence. And you add on to that the awareness of anxiety. Kids being told now, there's a school in my area, they're given a red card, the anxiety card. If they're in a classroom and they feel too anxious, they're encouraged to hold up the card, and then they're allowed to leave and go and sit in a room on their own for a little bit. So they're literally being taught to play the anxiety card, which for me might create more problems than it solves, because now we're so aware of anxiety that we're kind of getting our kids to avoid it at all costs. When, as we know, the very best experiences of your life are always going to be the other side of a bit of anxiety, because it's new and it's exciting and it's maybe, there's potential for something we haven't experienced before. If all we're encouraged to do is say, no, that makes me too anxious, I'll move away from it, then that's how we'll grow up, constantly avoiding any situation that causes any anxiety. Yeah. So I think it potentially is a bit worse these days.
And that's quite interesting. Interestingly, contrasting it with what Paula was talking about yesterday, was very much coming into kindness and self-kindness, and a lot of this is the same. There's almost this, conversely, this complete search that everybody's got to feel nice and happy the whole time, kind of, what's that, Stepford Wives kind of thing. Don't feel anything, everything's great. But as you said, you're never going to test yourself, get over that hurdle, jump off that, if you don't actually allow yourself those wobbles in the bottom of your belly for a certain period of time.
That's it, exactly. And I think as well, I'm all for, as you heard me say, self-kindness is the thing. And it sounds really cliched, because I know that we all talk about that. As long as it's a given, we should be kind to ourselves. But for me, it didn't change. I didn't change what I was doing until I started to think about things as in, well, what if when I shout at myself, there's actually somebody in there who I'm mistreating? How are they going to feel the next time I want something from them, or the next situation that's similar or resembles that thing I shouted at them about? Yeah. If every day we tell ourselves how rubbish we are for feeling so anxious, guess what tomorrow's going to bring? Feeling rubbish again about being anxious, and anxious about the possibility of being anxious and feeling rubbish again. It just becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy. And honestly, I've had people, there's one lady in particular I remember, we were working on depression. I don't think I did anything to change her response. She just took something from our conversations that was, don't beat yourself up anymore. However you feel, promise to love yourself in the midst of all of that and kind of nurture feeling better rather than feeling crap about feeling crap, turned everything around for her. I don't think I did anything in terms, like directly with any therapeutic approach, but just the concept of saying, well, maybe I won't beat my crew up because I think they're doing their best, you know, and maybe as a result of that, they might feel inspired to do better, you know?
I think that's totally, if somebody was in the middle of a panic attack and, you know, you hadn't got anyone near that could get a message into them, what would be the best way to deal with it?
Okay, for me, the only thing I've got with panic attacks is what a paramedic told me.
Uh-huh.
Okay. He said, I have seen thousands of panic attacks. I've never seen anyone die from them. You don't die from panic attacks, okay? But the problem is, it feels like we're going to die. Honestly, when you give people that information that the worst this will be is unpleasant for a bit, yeah, then funny enough, they don't tend to go into them anymore, because the thing that makes it unpleasant, so you have your first panic attack, which could be for any reason. You could be, you know, undernourished, underslept, you know, something about feels weird. You don't understand why you feel, I don't know, dizzy or lightheaded or a bit of pain here. And then your body goes into some sort of panic response because you fear, what does this mean? Am I dying? Yeah, a lot of people say their first panic attack, they either thought they were having a stroke or having a heart attack. That's why they went into panic, because when we experience something we regard as life-threatening, the natural, healthy response to a life-threatening incident is to go into a state of fight or flight, going into panic. Then, of course, you have that experience of it feeling like you're dying, and your mind red flags that now. So anytime you feel lightheaded, dizzy, a little bit weird, a little bit strange, your mind says, wait a minute, is this life-threatening incident happening again? And it sends you into panic, because that's the appropriate response to a life-threatening incident. So you create it because you fear it. I had somebody tell me, I mean, loads of times somebody told me this, I don't drink coffee anymore because coffee triggers my panic attacks. And it's like,
really?
No, it doesn't. You know, what coffee does, because it's got caffeine in it, is it raises your heart rate, because that's the purpose of it for a lot of people. And every time your heart rate raises, you're in that state where you feel like that might be the precursor to a panic attack. So now you have created the expectation of having a panic attack when we have a coffee. So it's not the coffee that does it. There's only one thing that creates panic attacks. It's you. It's always you doing it. It's not just happening to you. And as difficult it is in the midst of a panic attack to try and get that sort of, let's have a chat about this, you know, because you're not in that place, are you, you know? So I'm sure a paramedic has all the things they do, like, you know, get you to breathe into the bag and you know, all that sort of thing. But the simple truth of a panic attack is, firstly, nobody ever died from one. So you know you're safe. And the funny thing is, when you know you're safe, you've no reason to panic. And when your crew know you're safe, they don't panic. And that's the simple truth of it. So when I'm dealing with people that suffer panic attacks, I'm looking to, I mean, I had a guy recently, he was having 30 or 40 panic attacks a day. I mean, that literally a day. He walked into my clinic having a panic attack, and he left there and didn't have a panic attack after that. You know, and it was like 2 weeks before I saw him again. And he said, I haven't had a single one. Yeah. Because he understood now why the panic was happening, and his crew knew he was actually safe and not about to die. And I think that hopefully is the way we get to do this. But to refer back to Claire's question, how do we get people to listen to that logic? To be fair, the average person on the street, we're not going to listen to, because you don't understand what I'm going through. And that's the simple truth. Your crew aren't listening to you because you don't understand how this ship works, to put it into that analogy. When people come to see me, I'm granted this very special consideration, because they look at me and they say, you know how this works. So when I tell them something, they're probably likely, I'm probably got the ear of the crew. And there are ways that we work to make sure we've got the ear of the crew. They're listening and they're understanding what I'm saying. So then the logic goes in. Yeah, and so it has to come with a reason why why this person's crew would listen to you. If you want to tell someone else how to feel better, the logic won't go in, the sense won't be heard if their crew don't have a reason to listen to you as somebody that knows how this works. They're not going to take orders from anyone else's captain unless it's a really knowledgeable, experienced captain. And that's the issue there. And I'm not sitting here saying, so go and see a therapist, because that's the only way you're going to get changed. Because you know what? Your crew should actually be listening to you, yourself, your own captain. So that's why I think the best way of dealing with anxiety is to get this information, the necessary knowledge that enables you to get heard in terms of changing your own responses. Okay?
Brilliant. Thanks to everyone who's filled the poll in so far. If the rest of you could, I would be so grateful. That would send my anxiety levels down. Not that they're very high. I think one of the things that you learn with working with this method is just the importance of talking to exactly the right crew member, and that's perhaps the real secret. If you're talking to yourself, and it's like, which bit of me is doing this? Yeah.
And also you've got to recognise that different bits of you might be trying to steer you different directions.
Yeah.
When we're feeling quite conflicted, we all have that thing of, well, a bit of me wants to do this, but a bit of me wants to do this as well. It's kind of like we have loads of different crew members doing different things for their own individual reasons, which, that's great news, isn't it? That's more complicated. But to be fair, when we're addressing a certain issue, we can normally expect to be addressing the part of us that is creating it or that is to do with it. And we've got to listen to that part's reasons why currently it's still doing what it's doing. And it's never because it hates you. And you've always got to remember it's there to help you. If we can understand why it's doing this particular thing, we can potentially provide an answer. And that's really the crux of the method that we use, isn't it? It's sort of working out what the potential objections are from your crew. If you imagine captain goes to the crew member, I want you to change your job from this to this. And the crew member's like, I'd love to, but I can't. I mean, whatever that reason is why that crew member's saying no, that's what you've got to provide the answer for, and that's, I guess, so for me, social anxiety, the answer for me, if I had to break it down, was that it doesn't matter what other people think of me. Yeah, that was the one thing I needed my crew to hear, because when I was a kid, when I was at school, it really did matter, because we had like 25 people in the class that I was in for 5 or 6 years. You've got to find the people that you can find your little gang, your little clique, and then you can be safe from the bullies and things like that. So it really was important to be liked by everyone. As soon as I got into my adult years, and now I have 7.5 billion people to choose from, not just the 25 that I was put in the room with, I can just be me. And you know what happened then? The people that like me will find me, and I'll find the people that I like, and it will just happen naturally. So it doesn't matter whether other people like me or not,
And that is the step that so many people never get out of, is it, Tim? That's what I find. They never move from this kind of early teen state into realizing that they're in charge of their own life, they're in their own land, their own rules.
Absolutely. We're just we're trying to survive in those years, aren't we? In an environment that might be harsh. But that was it. That was what my crew needed to hear. It no longer is a priority to make people like you. You can let that go. And suddenly, oh shit, yeah, I can walk into a room with people that I don't know then. And I don't have to worry about, are they going to like me or not like me? Because I guarantee some people won't. Yeah, they'll look at me and not like me. That's fine as well, isn't it? Some people will look at me and like the look of me. That's okay. But it doesn't matter either way. And it's a difficult truth to get in there. But when it's in there, social anxiety tends to, well, in my case anyway, it just naturally dispersed. It just naturally got better and better and better at quite a frighteningly good rate as well, So I think, but there's always the answer to why are you doing this? My crew created anxiety around social situations through fear people wouldn't like me.
Yeah.
So I had to answer that,
Brilliant. Josie says, hi Josie, I found this really fascinating and I love the analogy.
Oh yeah.
Thank you.
That's lovely.
He said that should say ship analogy just to be.
Oh, am I? Is it what I think it says?
No, it's a ship.
Oh, yeah, the ship analogy. Okay, good, right, yeah. Brilliant. Oh, thank you very much, Josie. I appreciate that. I'm glad you've enjoyed it. I'm glad you got something from it.
Anyway, so I would like very much to say thank you so much for Tim to sharing part of your journey, where you've got to what you've created, how you've come to see anxiety, because I think it has. I've seen it have tremendous value for people in changing the way they are, and it's enlightening. Yeah, it's enlightening.
I do appreciate that.
If you want to follow up with Tim, then his website is thecontrolsystem.co.uk. He's on Facebook, which is the Control System, Tim Box, the Control System, and you can find him on Instagram as @the Control System as well. If you're watching live, we'll send you a proper CPD certificate, which is cool. If you're watching a recording, generally they're available for a week or two. If you're a member, then they're available forever in our little incentives page. And again, if you're watching live, we've got a special membership discount in your email with the recording link. So again, once again, thank you so much, Tim. I'm sure that everybody's really enjoyed this and given people a lot to think about and talk to themselves about, really, as well, you might say.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so Solange also says hi. Solange.
Hi, Solange.
Thank you very much.
Very welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, and bye everyone.
Bye.